The desert burned like a furnace beneath the Persian sun. Dust rose in great spirals as two worlds prepared to collide: the disciplined legions of Macedon and the opulent empire of Persia. At the heart of this impending storm stood two men fated for legend: Alexander, the youthful conqueror whose ambition burned brighter than the god's own flame, and Darius III, the great king clinging desperately to an empire crumbling beneath his feet. What happens when destiny itself bleeds on the battlefield? Stay with us, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this journey into one of history's most haunting final duels. The winds howled across the plains of Gaugamela, carrying with them whispers of fear and prophecy. Alexander's troops, though outnumbered 5-1, stood firm, sun-scorched faces hardened by years of relentless conquest. The scent of sweat, oil, and iron filled the air as shields locked and spears bristled like a wall of thorns. Across the horizon, Darius's vast host glittered: chariots armed with scythes, war elephants towering like living fortresses, and soldiers whose armor shimmered like molten gold. Yet behind their brilliance, unease rippled through the ranks. They faced not just an army, but an idea: Alexander's will. In the flickering dawn light, Alexander rode Bucephalus, his black steed, through the Macedonian lines. His men called him godlike, and he did not deny it. He spoke not of gold or glory, but of immortality, that death on the battlefield was the only true way to touch eternity. Darius, meanwhile, stood in his chariot, the weight of his crown pressing down like iron. He prayed to Ahura Mazda for deliverance, his trembling hands betraying the calm facade. Two kings, two destinies, one moment away from the firestorm that would carve their names into eternity. Trumpets blared, the sound of judgment. Macedonian phalanxes surged forward, their spears striking the earth in rhythm like a monstrous heartbeat. Dust blinded the field as horses screamed and arrows hissed through the air. Darius unleashed his chariots, their blades slicing through men like wheat before the scythe. But Alexander, seeing the trap, guided his forces aside with surgical precision. When the dust settled, Persian chariots lay shattered, their horses crushed beneath their own wheels. The tide had shifted, and a ripple of dread ran through Darius's army. As the Macedonians pressed forward, Darius's command wavered. Rumors spread that their god-king was retreating, and fear took root like poison. Soldiers began to falter, their formation breaking like a mirror under strain. Darius looked back. The horizon swallowed his empire in smoke and screams. He fled, abandoning his chariot, his royal insignia trampled in the dust. Behind him, Alexander's cavalry thundered forward, a living tide of vengeance. The once mighty king of kings now ran from a conqueror half his age. When the sun set over Gaugamela, the battlefield was a graveyard. Thousands of Persian corpses lay scattered, their golden armor dimmed by blood and ash. The vultures descended as Macedonian soldiers raised their spears in weary triumph. Alexander stood among the dead, silent. He did not smile. He had won the world, yet the air around him stank of rot and sorrow. "Is this the glory of conquest?" he whispered to the wind, his eyes reflecting the dying fires. His empire had grown, but his soul had begun to shrink. Darius fled eastward through the harsh plains of Media, his once proud retinue reduced to a handful of loyal guards. He looked nothing like the king who once ruled from Babylon's jeweled throne. His robes were torn, his crown lost, his spirit broken. Every night he dreamed of Alexander, the young face that haunted him, radiant with cruel destiny. As he stumbled through the wilderness, he wondered if he had angered the gods or merely failed to understand the cost of power. Persia's cities fell one by one, their gates flung open not by courage but by despair. The people bowed before Alexander's emissaries, offering gold and incense to a conqueror they had never seen. In Persepolis, flames devoured centuries of art and wisdom. The marble halls of kings turned to ash. Darius, hearing of this from afar, felt his heart turn to stone. His empire, the greatest the world had ever known, had become dust beneath Macedonian boots. Exhausted and hunted, Darius sought refuge among his satraps. But loyalty was a currency long spent. Bessus, his own kinsman, saw opportunity where others saw ruin. One night beneath a moonless sky, Darius was seized, bound, and left bleeding by the roadside. His blood mingled with the dust of the empire he had once ruled. When Alexander's scouts found him days later, Darius still breathed, whispering words of regret. Alexander knelt beside his fallen rival and wept. "You were a king," he said softly. "You deserved better." Alexander ordered that Darius be buried with royal honors. The Persians watched in silence as Macedonian soldiers carried their dead king's body through the desert, a sight both tragic and divine. Beneath the scorching sun, two empires met in death, their boundaries blurred by grief. That day, Alexander gained not only victory, but understanding, that every crown rests upon a grave. The world would remember his triumph, but he would remember Darius's eyes, weary, human, and full of fading light. In Babylon, Alexander was hailed as the new lord of Asia. Yet amid the feasts and incense, his mind wandered back to Gaugamela. The echo of dying men still haunted him. He had sought to be a god, but what he found was blood. His generals celebrated, their cups brimming with wine, but Alexander sat apart, the conqueror of worlds who had begun to lose himself. "What remains to conquer?" he murmured, "when the soul is already taken?" The deeper Alexander marched into Persia, the more he became like the kings he replaced. He wore Persian robes, adopted their customs, and ruled from their palaces. His men whispered that their hero was becoming the very thing he once vowed to destroy. Yet perhaps that was the cruel irony of power, that to hold an empire, one must become its mirror. The line between conqueror and tyrant began to fade, and the world held its breath. Years passed, and stories spread like wildfire. To some, Alexander was the son of Zeus himself. To others, a cursed soul doomed to wander forever. He had everything, yet sleep eluded him. He dreamed of Darius, of burning cities, of empty thrones. Each new victory felt hollow, each new monument a tombstone. History would remember his glory, but not the ghosts that whispered behind it. Why do men chase immortality when they know it leads to ruin? The faces of Gaugamela fade, but the question remains, eternal, unsatisfied. Perhaps Alexander fought not to rule the world, but to escape the fear of being forgotten. And perhaps Darius's tragedy was not that he lost an empire, but that he faced the silence of history. For in the end, both men were prisoners of the same illusion, that power can outlive flesh. When Alexander finally fell in Babylon years later, his body shuddered beneath fever and exhaustion. He had conquered all but his own mortality. His empire, like Darius's, fractured before his eyes. His generals quarreled, his cities burned, and his dreams turned to dust. As he lay dying, some claimed he whispered Darius's name, not in triumph, but in kinship. The circle had closed. Both kings now sleep beneath the same sky, their empires long devoured by time. The winds that once carried their armies now scatter sand over forgotten battlefields. Yet their story endures, not as a tale of victory, but as a mirror of human ambition. Two men, born in different worlds, bound forever by the tragedy of greatness. Walk today through northern Iraq, and you might still find shards of armor buried beneath the soil of Gaugamela. The earth remembers what men forget. Every fragment tells of the screams, the dust, the clash of destiny. Alexander won the world that day, and lost a piece of himself in the process. Centuries later, philosophers and poets still speak of Gaugamela. Some call it the birth of Western power, others call it the death of Eastern majesty. Yet beyond politics and empire lies something more profound, the truth that all greatness is temporary. The names carved in stone will fade, but the echo of their choices will never die. History is not written in gold, but in blood. The story of Alexander and Darius reminds us that glory and ruin share the same throne. Every victory carries a shadow, and every empire rises only to fall. Perhaps that is why their story still grips us, because in them, we see our own hunger for meaning, our own battle against time. As the dust of centuries settles, we are left with one haunting image, two kings staring across the battlefield, knowing that only one would leave alive. But in the silence after the clash, both found immortality. If you felt the weight of their story, give this video a like, share it with those who love history's deepest tragedies, and subscribe to join us for the next epic unraveling of the past. Until then, remember, even gods can bleed.